大家好，我是温铁军。我们现在开始迈克尔·哈特森教授的第一讲。我们这个第一讲呢，他做了很多关于西方的这个经济发展过程和西方经济学，那个经济思想史，乃至于经济演变过程本身这个理论与实践之间的很多这个差距。他这些分析呢相对比较客观，我希望大家有兴趣好好的学一学，为什么我们今天在中国的这些教科书既解释不了中国的问题，也解释不了世界的问题。其实当我们这些教科书照搬西方的时候，那按照哈德森现在的这个解释，西方的教科书同样也解释不了西方自己的经济发展历程中的大量的问题，也并不能反映西方的经济发展的实际。所以呢，他这个第一讲应该说对我们每个有兴趣了解这个世界经济变化的人来说呢，都是很重要的。那我们现在呢，开始介绍哈德森教授的第一讲的第一节。在这一节呢，哈德森教授将会谈论中美矛盾的本质。他认为，中美两国之间是工业资本主义与金融资本主义之间的矛盾。他说，中美冲突不是两个工业竞争对手争夺市场，而是两种不同经济体制之间的冲突。也就是工业的逻辑和金融的逻辑是不同的。那因此呢，中美之间的冲突呢，其实是中国的工业资本主义与美国的金融资本主义之间这种矛盾。那他会追溯那工业国家是怎样兴起的，工业资本主义有什么逻辑。历史上所有的工业大国的兴起都是靠政府强而有力介入经济，防止十足垄断阶层竞争力，亲工业政策来推动国家竞争力。那么美国去工业化有什么教训呢？古典经济学对自由市场的概念与今天又有什么不同呢？哈特森教授认为，古典经济学理念中的自由市场是一个去租化，也就是没有经济租的市场，是从实租实力阶级手上解放出来的市场。它是服务于工业资本主义的，或者叫服务于产业资本崛起的。那美国经济呢，现在正在被实租实力阶层所榨干。那经济租与生产商品服务所得利润之间本质上是不同的。所以他提出的问题是，中国到底是想仿效美国利用金融的高效致富之路，也就是中国到底是打算走美国的金融资本崛起的道路呢，还是希望按照中国特色的社会主义从美国病这个病态之中来改变甚至拯救自己，也就是中国怎么改出美国道路的问题。
The major world conflict in the world today is between the United States and China. And the series of lectures is going to be about how economic theory explains this conflict and how it's developed historically. It's not simply a conflict between two industrial rivals competing for a market. It's between two different economic systems. But it's not between capitalism and socialism. It's between the logic of an industrial economy and the logic of a financial economy, finance capitalism. The United States is deindustrializing, and it's also financializing. It's going in the opposite direction from which China has gone for the last 30 years. Now, that makes the kind of capitalism that we have in the United States very different from the capitalism in Marx's day and from the capitalism in America's 19th century when it really took off. America in the 19th century was doing pretty much what China's doing today. And Europe was doing pretty much what China's doing today. The first thing they did was they wanted protective tariffs for their industry. They wanted government investment in education, roads, communications, all of the basic public infrastructure, so that they could supply the basic needs of people at the lowest possible price. And all of this was considered the logic of industrial capitalism. It also was called socialism, even in the 19th century. Almost all of the observers after about 1848, the whole second half of the 19th century, everybody thought that capitalism was evolving into an increasing role to play by government, and socialism was one form of another. And the first characteristic of socialism was to stop the landlord class that had emerged from the medieval period of Europe, to stop the banking class, to stop monopolists. Capitalism was revolutionary, and it was as revolutionary as socialism is. That's why it was turning into socialism, because in order to compete with other countries, Great Britain, the United States, and Germany had to lower the cost of labor that industrialists had to pay their employees. Now, you had to pay all employees enough money to live and to break even. The basic subsistence wage you had to pay, and that meant you had to pay them enough to buy their own housing. They needed to buy food. And as technology began to rise, they needed to have a good education. And pretty soon in the United States, throughout the 19th century, you had what was called the American School of Economists. They were the pro-industrial school, the business school. Today, they'd be called socialists because they said, well, you have to pay labor more because well-fed labor is more productive. Well-educated labor is more productive. Well-housed labor is more productive, and healthier labor is more productive. And if the government pays for the costs of public health, then it's going to, the capitalists' employers won't have to pay for it. So we want the government to pay for as much of the basic needs of the population as possible, so that the industrial employers can pay their labor as little as possible, so that the products they sell can undersell the industry of countries that don't have a capitalist revolution, that don't get rid of the feudal landlord class, that don't get rid of monopolies, and that let their basic infrastructure be held in private hands. So this is exactly what China is doing today. It's what America did, and it's the inherent logic of industrial competition in the world. Today is very different. Today, the US economy is shrinking, but the stock market is soaring. And the United States is simply following what economic theories in their textbooks and their national income statistics say is the most efficient. That is, most efficient at making money. Now, here's the problem that I want to talk about in this lecture. When Chinese students are sent to the United States to study economics, they're taught in American textbooks that it's more efficient to financialize the economy than to industrialize it. And when trade theory and international relations are taught, the textbooks are all in agreement. China should not have industrialized. It was a disaster for China to industrialize. That if China followed the theory of comparative advantage, it would have remained making paper flowers and labor-intensive handicrafts in agriculture. Because when it industrialized, it interfered with the market. And that's socialism, and it would have been more efficient if China just would have let the rich people, a very rich landlord class, take over and squeeze out an economic surplus from low-priced labor, and that was its comparative advantage. And China interfered with this. And interfering is supposed to cost money, but it was not a free market. And a free market means it's free for the wealthy people to take over the government to impoverish the rest of the economy. That's the opposite of what Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and all of the 19th century people defined as a free market. They said a free market is a market free from rent, free from the rentier class, that is the rent extracting class, a whole class of people who made money not by being part of the production process, not by innovating or playing a productive role at all, but just collecting rents on how being a landlord, being a monopolist, and extracting money. Now, of course, what they're taught in the textbooks is all nonsense, but it's nonsense that the American mainstream has come to believe, and it's the nonsense that's led America itself to deindustrialize. That's why the housing costs are so high. In New York, the average New York City, the average rent is $4,000 a month. That's $50,000 a year. Healthcare begins at $6,000 per person a year, and if you actually get sick, that can be anywhere from $6,000 to $50,000. And basically, if you are a wage earner and you get sick, you go bankrupt. Because the healthcare is so expensive in the United States. That's what's happening today. Because we have the pandemic on, there's maybe 40 million unemployed. During the pandemic, people have not been able to pay their rent. All of a sudden, there are going to be millions of people in January that are evicted from their houses for not paying rent. Already 70% of the restaurants in the United States and the hotels have closed down. The whole economy, the real economy of hotels, restaurants, grocery stores is shrinking, and the stock market is soaring because for the financial class, this is a bonanza. For Wall Street and the financial center, they can now begin to pick up all this real estate that people are losing and forfeiting at a low price. They can make the big companies crowd out all of the small family-owned companies. Now, the problem is that small companies employ over half of the American population. And if these companies disappear, if they're all taken over by the large conglomerates and monopolies, then you're going to have a shrinkage of employment. You're going to have many homeless people. You're going to have a poor economy. And the economic textbooks say that's the way to get rich. You can make money and get rich fastest when the economy is shrinking. Adam Smith said that profits are often highest when the economy is going fastest to ruin. And that's what's happening today. There's a gravitization, as the Russians call it. There's a grabbing of assets. There's a grabbing of property. What is remarkable is when you look at the statistics that compare the United States gross domestic product, GDP, the American economy seems to be getting richer, even as there's mass unemployment, even as there are evictions, and even as it's getting poor. And the reason is because when housing prices are inflated, when the stock market is inflated, when people are making money not by producing goods and services, but by owning stocks and bonds and real estate, they're getting so much richer that this is counted as an increase in GDP. If you have to borrow more money to buy a more expensive house, and the house prices are inflated, and everybody has to pay more money to rent an apartment, then that's counted as an increase in GDP, as if this is actually a product. And the product is simply the rise in the cost of housing, the rise in the cost of education. There's no distinction between productive and unproductive labor. And you can imagine that if Americans were to be given all of their food, all of their clothing, everything they need for free, they still couldn't compete with Chinese labor or Asian labor or other countries' labor because the cost of housing and healthcare, insurance, and taxes alone are way more than labor earns in any other foreign country. There's an enormous amount of medical care as a result of the pandemic. The pandemic has pushed up GDP because you spend much more money on doctors, on medical services, on hospital visits. It costs $20,000 to be taken by a helicopter to the hospital if you're in the countryside, or if you're the President Trump and have to be carried across town. This expensive economy is considered how to get rich. And there's no distinction between economic rent, which is unearned income, and actually producing goods and services and profits. And yet that's what classical economics is all about a century ago. The profits were something that the industrialist makes by hiring labor to produce goods to sell at a markup. And rents are something that a landlord gets just for inheriting property and charging more for it. It's something that a banker gets just for creating money and charging interest to people who need it. It's what a drug company will get to say, well, we have a test for coronavirus. It's going to cost you $2,000 to take the test. That's what it costs in the United States. So the medical costs go up, the cost structure goes up. That's considered actually producing more. And of course, this is so much nonsense that I don't think it's hard for other countries to really believe it if they don't look at how the statistics are put together. But there's no university that I know of in the United States that teaches how do you look at the gross domestic product statistics. What do the national income statistics mean? What are the balance of payment statistics? I taught this 50 years ago, but the course I was giving were the only ones. So I think these if you look at the list of billionaires in the United States today, they're not industrialists. They're financial and banking tycoons. They're monopolists. They're absentee landlords. But industry itself has been taken over by the financial sector. And in practice, it's been deindustrialized. In the United States, more than 90% of the corporate profits are not used to expand the business. They're not used to start new factories. They're not used to employ more people. They're used simply to pay out as dividends or to buy back their shares. And if you use your profits to buy back the stock in your company, that pushes up the stock price. And companies are run not to produce more goods, not to employ more, not to produce more output or to even make a profit, but to increase the stock price. So economics is really all about wealth and basically financial wealth and claims on the real economy. And any country's system of wealth, of real estate, stocks, and bonds, these are claims on labor and industry. It's an inside-out world. Looking at an economy financially is looking at the liability side of the balance sheet. What do borrowers owe the creditors? And the creditors, what they have in savings, that's their wealth. The 1% gets wealthy by having the 99% of the population in debt to itself. Landlords get wealthy by monopolizing housing and making people pay more and more and more. So these lectures are largely about whether China wants to follow the American way of being efficient and getting rich financially, or whether it wants to be a socialist country and save itself from the American disease of creating a wealthy class at the top that's going to take over government and make itself richer by making the bottom 90% poorer.
从这个角度来说，我看他的第一节啊，其实很大程度上和我们过去讨论的这个问题有直接相关性。用我们过去说，比如说我们讲美国，美国一直在这个南北战争以后，当时打出来这个一个战争总统叫格兰特，那他呢又是这个军事将领出身，所以他一上手，你想军人出身的总统，他一上手来以后，他要干嘛？他当然搞的是保护主义啊，他是闭关锁国呀，他严禁，就是美国这时候的工业是弱势的，他就严禁美国跟这个欧洲这些工业强国来搞贸易，他就是先封闭他20-30年，然后让美国自己的工业吃自己的原料，然后美国的工业品卖在美国国内，直到美国基本上产业资本算是稳住了，有竞争能力了，他才对外开放。而且这个对外开放首先打的是殖民战争，就是通过美西战争得到了这个西班牙原来在这个亚洲的传统殖民地菲律宾，然后以菲律宾为跳板跳进中国大陆，然后开始参与。他去的晚呢，他到187几年吧 才开始这个美西战争胜利之后才开始进入亚洲，抢夺这个欧洲列强在亚洲的殖民地。也就是说，他要保护自己本国产业的时候，他是不对外开放，直到他产业崛起了，把老牌帝国主义西班牙打败了，得到了西班牙在亚洲的殖民地，他才跳入亚洲去开拓中国这个殖民地的市场。所以他成了当时的一个很重要的思想的提出者，那就叫做门户开放，所谓的自由主义嘛。你们必须给我所有的这个你们承诺给那个其他西方列强的开放各个港口、开放各种通商口岸的这些你们的条件都得对我同样让我享受。所以我们说美国的产业资本崛起一样，它是要阶段化的，但是美国人的教科书却不是这么写的。他们一开始呢，这段时间他不告诉你们，他现在说的都是所谓新自由主义的这套理论了，就告诉你必须从一开始你就彻底开放那弄得我们现在国内的很多学者认为中国的鸦片战争之所以被人家打，是因为你坚持不开放，你这个没有加入这个世界市场的勇气等等，就是这些说法其实恰恰是就是食人牙慧都没找着哪块牙慧你稍微咂摸着有点滋味，就是他这个哈茨给你讲的这个是个很真实的历史过程。所以我说他这个第一节很有意思，希望大家愿意好好学。